I'm Billy S, Erdtree's Blessing. Today we're ranking my favourite boss from every Soulsborne DLC. I just wanted to make a shorter video this week. It's been a while since I got to sit down with a quick and easy topic like this. From Artorias of the Abyss to Shadow of the Erdtree, I'll cover each DLC pack in chronological order. I've talked about all these boss fights in past ranking videos, so if you're interested, check the Soulsborne ranking playlist on my channel for dozens upon dozens of extra Souls video goodness. Now, this one will contain spoilers for Shadow of the Erdtree, both in its dedicated entry and in the Ashes of Ariandel entry for Dark Souls 3. You have been warned. Without further ado, these are my favourite Soulsborne bosses from each DLC. Let me know your favourites down below. Starting with Dark Souls 1's Artorias of the Abyss, I could make a case for any of the major bosses sans the Sanctuary Guardian for taking the spot on today's list, but my favourite has never wavered, it's Knight Artorias. Without a doubt, one of my favourite characters in the series, Knight Artorias is a fight that manages to balance an interesting story told through his lore, alongside an extremely difficult fight for the time that can still be tough to this day. That introduction as he spears a bloated resident and launches them your way is yet to be topped as one of the best boss intros in the series. The guttural roars he emits as he chases you down like a rabid animal, the abyss leaking from him with every attack as we see him fallen from his prime, and yet even with a broken arm, Artorias is able to deftly defeat our chosen undead over and over again, which has to be the biggest flex in gaming. Dark Souls DLC purposefully upped the speed of its bosses compared to the main game, which is enough to make them all feel tougher because your player speed isn't as prepared to handle them. So learning Artorias' moveset was crucial. He can buff himself mid-fight if you leave him alone for too long, but luckily you can knock him out of that animation if you have strong enough attacks. My favourite move is his forward flip sword slam, which can be used up to 3 times in succession. It's just a level of acrobatics I didn't expect from this man, and it's become the de facto move I think about when I think Artorias. And for eagle-eyed players, you may notice that Artorias shares a lot of his moves with Great Grey Wolf Sif, which is heartbreaking in hindsight, as all those years later, Sif still remembered the moves of their master. All set to a memorable boss track that exemplifies how the boss themes in these games don't always have to be these bombastic forces of nature. His music is far somber, atmospheric, and even as it picks up, it never feels like it tries to overpower what's happening on screen. You could make a case for Calamite or Manus taking this spot, but for me, Artorias will always reign supreme. Moving on to Dark Souls 2, we've got 3 different DLC packs to go through, the first being the Crown of the Sunken King. And of the 3 bosses in this DLC, there's a very clear winner. Sin, the Slumbering Dragon, was the saving grace of Dark Souls 2, as we almost went an entire Souls game without a good dragon fight, and he's the only dragon fight in the series that I can recall who has a focus on the poison status. The closest we got was Decaying Exeques from Elden Ring, who focused on Scarlet Rot. Sin works as a dragon fight because he spends far more time on the ground with the player. He doesn't have any cages to cling to like the Guardian Dragon, nor the bloated health bar and minimal moveset of the Ancient Dragon. He's an active participant in this fight, and I love it. From his claw, bite, and tail combos that can leave you devastated if not careful, to his swoops from the air that require perfect dodging to avoid, to his toxic fireballs that will have you rushing for those poison moss clumps, I never feel like I'm the one in control of the boss fight when Sin is on the battlefield. He dictates the flow in a way I really respect, and this is all with a giant spear sticking through his body at all times. A tragic tale that caused him to wipe Shulva out in its entirety once his poison was launched across the kingdom. His theme is an absolute banger, with a tone that shifts from heroic to grandiose in an instant, while taking aspects of the music from the previous dragon fights in the game to set the blueprint for dragon themes to come. The only thing I don't like is that his skin is corrosive, and it means you need a lot of repair powder if you want your weapon to survive the fight. He may not be my favourite boss in Dark Souls 2, but he comes damn close, and beats out Alana and the gank squad here with ease. Next up, we've got the Crown of the Old Iron King, and anybody who's seen my Dark Souls 2 rankings know that I adore all 3 bosses in this DLC. They make up 3 of my top 5 fights in the game, but my favourite goes to Fume Knight. While Sir Alon comes so close, and Blue Smelter is watching from the sidelines, Fume Knight just hits the aesthetic and vibe that I prefer when it comes to my fantasy. I love the cold, unfeeling Ashen Forge where we fight him, at the pit of Broom Tower in this blue prison where he lurks. It's such a stark contrast from the fiery reds and oranges of the level we just came through, and as he rises from the floor to take up his Fume Knight Ultra Greatsword, which he wields one-handed by the way, we know we're in for a tough time. I love that Fume Knight is a boss that doesn't give you too much downtime during the fight. Dark Souls 2 can be broken by its healing system, so it makes sense that the toughest bosses in the game just won't allow you to take that advantage. You might get one sneaky Estus off, but more often than not you'll try healing only to take a bonk to the face. I also enjoy Fume Knight's surprising reach. His greatsword swings arc around him to an insane degree, so that if you dodge around him at the start of his swing, you might still get caught by the end of it. There's a serious element of positioning required to overcome this fight that I really vibe with. In his second phase, he alights his sword with dark flames and focuses more on his greatsword. He can launch fireballs outwards in a large circle, his attacks do way more damage, and the way he can make up distance in this boss arena is terrifying. Just make sure to destroy the idols outside so he doesn't start healing up midway through. I think his second phase is actually more exploitable than his first though, so if you feel you can handle it, pop on Velstat's helmet and watch the sparks fly. Unless you're somebody who used Velstat's armor just for fun, in which case you never got to experience his first phase. I'm so sorry. All set to one of the angriest themes any of these bosses have ever had in these games, Fume Knight has some real repressed rage that comes across in the wrathful, malicious, hard-hitting instruments. The choir helps give the theme some levity, but it only serves to create an overall oppressive atmosphere. Perfection. The fight took me so many tries on my first playthrough, and even though I've got his number nowadays, it doesn't change how one false move can spell your doom. Plus, he doesn't have as glaring a weakness to dodging inwards to the right like Sir Alon has. Last up for Dark Souls 2, we have the Crown of the Ivory King, and it's another open and shut case. Burnt Ivory King, take the stage. While I love Aaviier as well, there's no denying that an invisible cat can't really hold a candle to an actual war. From the introduction to the fight dropping into the old chaos, the first 10 seconds of the song blasting into your ears to set the stage for the epic battle to come, to the war you have to wage against the Charred Lois Knights to even have a crack at the boss, it's such a grand introduction to the final fight created for Dark Souls 2, and feels far more like a final boss than that of Nashandra or Uldir. Depending on how you explored Eliam Lois, you'll have a quartet of Lois Knights by your side to help combat the darkness. As you defeat enemies, they'll seal off the portals one by one, allowing you to turn the tide of battle. While this can be a bit tedious on repeat playthroughs, as dying to the main boss forces you to do all this preamble again, I can't deny that for a first-time experience, it blew my mind. Once the Burnt Ivory King makes his grand entrance, emerging from a flaming gateway of hellish proportions though, the true test begins. I don't think he's an insanely hard fight by any means, his moveset is tough but manageable, and if you rescued every Lois Knight in the level, you'll even have a friend here to help take him on. I love when his sword alights with energy midway through the fight, granting him more range, as he wields the equivalent of a lightsaber to slay you as best he can. The only issue being that the weapon has a harder to read hitbox as a result. I can never tell how far his range actually is. Compared to Fume Knight and Sir Alon, I think Burnt Ivory King is an easier fight in a 1v1 setting, which actually works in his favour. I wouldn't want to repeat this boss over and over, doing that intro each time to reach him. So the sooner I can clear the fight while still getting the best experience possible, the better. And that's not even going into his tragic lore, and how Alsana cast away her desire for power, unlike her sisters, to actually help the man she loved to rest. This guy was such a Chad, he turned a shard of Manus into a good person. If that isn't amazing energy, I don't know what is. Time to head to the PS4 as we look at Bloodborne's Old Hunters DLC. And once again, we have some of the best bosses in the game here, but my favourite has always been Orphan of Kos. Back when we only had up to Dark Souls 3, it always felt like the Orphan of Kos was considered the pinnacle of FromSoft difficulty. The challenge presented by his fast, frantic moveset was unlike anything else in Bloodborne, and the surprisingly vast move pool he could draw from was enough to threaten even the hardiest of players. I absolutely adore his placenta. Sentences I don't think anybody has ever uttered in human history. The way it stretches outwards, similar to a chained axe, makes it one of the most versatile boss weapons in the series. He can slam it into the ground from the air, he can whip it around himself in circular motions to catch you off guard, he can just hit you with it without any of that fancy mumbo-jumbo. I'll just say it, I wish Kos's placenta was a boss weapon we could wield. What I love though is that despite his level of aggression, as long as you come into the fight well prepared with good gems and runes equipped, and a decent grasp of parrying, you can handle his phase 1 with a surprising amount of finesse. His phase 2, where he grows giant wings and begins to launch toxic projectiles while summoning lightning across the arena, is more frenetic in design, but I'd say the fact he's moving around so much is actually a boon to the player. Yes, he's technically a bit harder to hit, but all that movement means there's less targeted attacks on the player at any given time. Call me crazy, but I find his phase 2 a tad bit easier myself, and I'm allowed to say that, the reason being, and yes, I'm going to shamelessly flex because I'm fucking proud of this and I will mention it every time I get the chance to, I beat Orphan of Kos on my first ever try, and on my recorded run a few years later, it only took me 2 tries to beat him. Turns out either I'm just really good at the fight, I picked a great weapon to fight him since I tend to enjoy strength builds, or I'm just insanely lucky. And yet I find his moveset so fun to go up against. I'm really looking forward to revisiting this fight one day in some challenge runs, so I can finally experience that high level of difficulty people praise so much. The music doesn't really do anything for me, I'll admit, but that's not a shock. Ludwig and Maria have far more memorable OSTs within the community, and they come up earlier in the DLC. Orphan, meanwhile, goes for a more ambient theme that builds up slowly in intensity. It's kinda hard to hear over the Don't you just love a little From Software DLC? So do I. But you know what I love even more? Getting to my goal of reaching 35,000 subscribers by the end of the year. That's our goal, that's what we're trying to achieve. I don't know if we can do it, but I sure hope we can. If you want to help support the channel and keep us growing, consider parrying that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of my future videos. Or you can go the extra mile and become a channel member. It is $4.99 a month, it gets you early access to future videos, it gets you a shout out in the description, and at the end of every video as well, and there may be a few extra perks coming later in the year. So thank you so much for supporting this channel. Let's get back to the ranking. Moving on to Dark Souls 3, we have the Ashes of Ariandel DLC. And of course, this spot goes to the Champion's Grave Tender and I'm kidding, this was a freebie for Sister Fried. I actually talked about her just last week in my Dark Souls 3 community ranking of the boss difficulty, and yes, she is one of the toughest fights in the game for sure. 3 phases, all with a very distinct level of aggression and challenges to overcome, which means learning 3 different movesets. The first phase is what Priscilla's fight from Dark Souls 1 wanted to be, which makes sense, they both come from Painted Worlds, so it's a clear reference to her. I love how you're able to track her invisibility by watching the direction the snow and debris aims in when she jumps. Her scythe moveset is graceful and refined, yet dangerously deadly. To balance this, her level of aggression is lower and she has less poise than a baby, allowing you to knock her out of certain animations if you're quick or skilled enough. Phase 2, her sugar daddy comes in to help, Father Ariandel trying to crush you with his chili-flavoured soup. I've always found this to be the easiest phase, because it's just about running away from AoEs. Father Ariandel is too slow to catch up to you if you're running, and Sister Fried keeps her distance constantly. You just have to boop her while she's healing, and bish bash bosh, sugar daddy defeated. Only Black Flame Fried emerges from the ashes, proclaiming to the player, I don't have a sugar daddy, I've never had a sugar daddy. If I wanted a sugar daddy, I could go out and get one because I am what? Sickening. You could never have a sugar daddy because you are not that kind of ashen one. Baby, everything I have worked for and gotten for myself in this painted world, I have built myself from the ground up, you fucking bitch, launches into multiple Black Flame AoEs. The first ever 3-phase boss fight, FromSoft trolling the player, and all 3 of her phases being an absolute blast, with her final stand being an enhanced variation of her phase 1, I mean, come on now. She set an entirely new standard for boss fights. And since then, we've had so many— Wait, what do you mean only one other boss fight has had 3 health bars, not including Sekiro? Wait, what do you mean it was given to a fucking sunflower? Wait, what do you mean the sunflower is actually an amazing boss? Damn, her legacy lives on. Moving on to the Ringed City, we have some of the best boss fights in the game here, but I'll always lean towards Slave Knight Gale as the best of the bunch. Obviously, Medea and the Demon Prince come so close to snatching those tickets to DragCon, being one of the best dragon and gank fights respectively, but Gale was the final hurrah of the trilogy, the last boss, and you just had to be there when the game first came out to experience Gale at his peak. You and him, a slave knight and an unkindled, the last 2 surviving creatures at the end of the world, this massive wasteland expanse where all that remains is to battle it out so one of you can claim the Dark Soul. And we had no idea if From Software were ever going to create any more Dark Souls style games like Elden Ring or Sekiro after this, so you have to keep that in mind. Gale chooses to go through with all of this, knowing in the end his own blood becomes the paint required to create a new world. And that tragedy is at the heart of this fight. His attacks are powerful, with so much weight to every strike, but he's not this rabid beast, nor so ferocious you can't counterattack, quite the opposite. I find his moveset very calculated, aggressive to the right point, and once he hits phase 2, he becomes a true force of nature. A giant sword? Check. Crossbow bolts that can fire endlessly like a Gatling gun? Check. His cape turning into this demonic force that can stretch outwards to damage the player? Check. And as he drops lower and lower, the power of the Dark Soul itself begins to seep out until it explodes with a roar, skulls launching towards the player in a cacophony of horror, lightning strikes down around you, and you have to watch your step lest you're shocked into submission. Gale is relentless, but can still be dodged around or blocked like any other boss. His music builds up with the fight, starting off slow and somber in the first third, but once that mid-cutscene hits, that classic Dark Souls 3 choir pipes up and it goes full throttle. And the beat drop for the third phase, tied to his skull explosion attack, is some of the most satisfying dynamic music in the series, while the string instruments in the backing track go insanely hard, creating this true feeling that this is it. There's nowhere left to go but forwards to slay this man and obtain it, that Dark Soul. Gale set a standard for this series, a standard that they've been trying to replicate ever since. I think the final boss of the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC was trying to go for that same feel as Gale, but I don't think it landed in the same way. Gale remains the GOAT. Finally, we reach Shadow of the Erdtree. This is the entry most prone to change over the coming years because I've only got my first playthrough to go off of, and while you can tell I'm prone to night bosses since I adored Rolana and Messmer to death, for the first time since Dark Souls 2, the token DLC Dragon Fight reigns supreme. Baal! Vile Baal the Dread is my current favourite boss from Shadow of the Erdtree. The Jagged Peak Zone is a masterclass in building up Baal to the player. You hear from the Dragon Priestess about how he was the worst of all the dragons. You may have even met Egon on your way to the Dragon's Pit earlier, and how he was screaming about Baal the whole time. But then you reach the zone, lightning is striking down, you climb the mountain past a few drakes, dodge some boulders, get past Senesacks, only to emerge onto a mountainside in the middle of the storm, the corpses of drakes littering the rock face. This continues until you finally reach Bale's arena, this perfectly circular zone with flowers littering the battlefield, and then Bale drops in. He's a shockingly agile fighter despite missing certain limbs, able to leap over you and tail swipe your ass, or use various snaps and claw swipes to combo you into oblivion. His fire breath is tinged with electricity, allowing him to hurt you with 2 different elemental damage types, but then add his spectral wings granted to him at half health, allowing him to perform insane dive bomb attacks where he's launching fireballs, creating streams of flames across the arena, and just generally being a nightmare for the player, and you have something truly special. Summoning Egon is so worthwhile here because not only is he a great distraction to give you time to learn Bale's moveset, but his in-battle dialogue is going down as one of the most memorable in FromSoft's history. I really hope this trend of NPC dialogue continues into future games because it made any fights with this feature feel so much more dynamic and alive. I described Bale's fight in my previous DLC boss video as a Monster Hunter battle that made its way into a Soulsborne game. It's that level of energy, and I don't think there's a better way to describe it. I'm still not sure if Bale beats Placidusax as my favourite dragon fight, despite the fact he has some of Placidusax's head draped along his body, that's so fucking metal, but he's certainly putting up one hell of a show, and I'm already thinking about my next playthrough so I can take him on all over again. And that's my list. Which bosses from each DLC are your favourites? Let me know down below, and be sure to parry that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all my future videos. My social medias are on screen now, feel free to follow where you feel comfortable. I recommend my Twitter, or my Blue Sky, or my Discord, though my Twitter is 100% the best place to go. I'm honestly not that active on Blue Sky, and I don't really go into my Discord unless I'm posting a community ranking poll. Oof, I am just so bad at social media. But thank you very much for watching, a shout out to my YouTube channel members for supporting me for another month, you guys are amazing, and I will see you next time for another video. Adios!